There were leaders, and then there was Commander Elias Rourke, the man who stood at the bridge of humanity's final gamble, staring unflinchingly into the abyss where empires crumbled and civilizations fell. He was neither idealistic nor cruel, only pragmatic. War had carved him into something unyielding, and he bore its scars not as burdens, but as lessons. He had survived the fall of Titan, where humanity's last orbital stronghold had burned in, the void, its wreckage a silent testament to their near extinction. He had stood in the ruins of Geneva, watching as the World Council signed the Unification Pact, not for peace, but for survival. And in the shadows of dying stars he had rebuilt Earth's military might, not with brute force, but with something far more dangerous: strategy. The galaxy underestimated humans, and that, Rourke believed, was the greatest weapon of all. Humanity was never the strongest nor the fastest. Their technology, while formidable, was not the most advanced in the galaxy. But they had something the Zenvari and their ilk could never comprehend: adaptability. They had learned to survive through ruin. When Earth had nearly torn itself apart through war and disaster, they had clawed their way back, not through sheer power, but through ingenuity and deception. When the stars had opened to them, they had watched and waited, hiding their full strength beneath layers of diplomacy and misdirection. Cyber warfare had become their silent blade, a weapon unseen until it was already at the enemy's throat. Over decades, Earth had infiltrated foreign systems, planting sleepers in their networks, embedding themselves in places no empire would think to look. They appeared weak, fractured, and slow to act. That illusion had been cultivated deliberately, because when the time came, the galaxy would never see them coming. The Zenvari dominion was not built on cooperation nor diplomacy. It was built on conquest. Their war machine had crushed a dozen species before humanity had ever left their solar system. Their fleets were vast, their armies relentless. The Zenvari saw the cosmos as a hierarchy, at the top themselves and, beneath them, prey. Those who could not fight were meant to serve. Those who resisted were exterminated. To them, humans were nothing, a minor species, barely worth the effort to conquer. They had ignored humanity's expansion, disregarded their presence, and when the first diplomatic envoy arrived, the Zenvari had barely acknowledged them. It was the first and last mistake they would ever make. The UN Defense Council had tried diplomacy. Humanity always tried diplomacy first. Ambassadors were sent to the Zenvari homeworld offering treaties, trade, the possibility of peaceful coexistence. The Dominion's response was swift, brutal, and broadcast across the stars: public execution. Didier. Footage was clear. The Zenvari warlord standing over the kneeling humans. No pretense, no negotiations, only a blade through the envoy's throat, followed by a declaration: humanity is weak. Humanity will kneel, or humanity will burn. It was arrogance, a simple extermination order for an enemy not even deemed worthy of conquest. They did not expect retaliation. They did not expect war. But they also did not expect the silence. Earth did not rage. They did not protest. They did not beg for clemency. They simply waited. 2 years later, Hades Prime was placed on the Zenvari border. A fragile, isolated colony, seemingly desperate to cling to survival. Reports trickled in about its failing infrastructure, its dwindling resources. It was a perfect target, weak, exposed, and undefended. The Dominion took the bait. They sent a fleet, eager for an easy slaughter. But what they saw as a desperate last stand was nothing more than a carefully laid snare. Beneath Hades Prime, hidden away in deep space, the true fleet of humanity lay in wait, silent, invisible, watching as the Zenvari marched willingly into the abyss. The sky above Hades Prime darkened, a fleet unlike anything humanity had faced before. Zenvari dreadnoughts, carriers, and warships stretched across the void. Their weapons glowed, primed for annihilation. The Zenvari commander sent a broadcast: "This is not a war. This is an extermination. Die screaming, or kneel." And yet, there was no response. No scrambling of human forces. No panicked distress. Calls, only silence. Rourke stood at the bridge of the UNS Retribution, watching the enemy's approach. He did not flinch. He did not bark orders. He merely waited. One of his officers turned to him. "Sir, we have confirmation. The Zenvari fleet is within full engagement range." Rourke exhaled slowly. "Then let's give them a final courtesy." A single transmission was sent. "We warned you. You should have listened." For a brief moment, there was confusion on the Zenvari bridge. What was this? A feeble attempt at defiance? A meaningless gesture before annihilation? Then their fleet shuddered. Lights flickered. Controls became unresponsive. Shields collapsed. Weapons went silent. And the Zenvari finally understood. It was not a battle. It was execution. The sleeper virus buried in their systems for decades activated. Entire dreadnoughts shut down. Their own targeting systems turning against them. Orbital stations exploded from within, detonating their own fuel reserves. AI-driven sabotage spread like wildfire, crippling every Zenvari-controlled sector. Panic erupted among the enemy ranks. The impossible was happening. Our weapons are offline. Shields unresponsive. Systems compromised. Earth has. Their voices drowned in static as human warships decloaked, emerging from the void like wraiths. They had been there the whole time, unseen, waiting for this exact moment. Rourke leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Commence Operation Ragnarok. Hell descended upon the Zenvari. The Zenvari Grand Fleet loomed over Hades Prime, their massive warships casting long shadows over the barren world below. The Zenvari High Commander, Varkashtal, sneered as he stood on his bridge, staring down at the helpless human colony. "This will be over in minutes," he growled, issuing the order. "Fire on the surface. Burn their cities to ash." The command was relayed, weapons primed, plasma batteries charged, missiles locked onto their targets. Then, nothing happened. Confusion rippled through the fleet. Officers barked at their stations. Technicians frantically tried to override the failure. The weapons would not fire. "Report!" Varkashtal roared, his four eyes narrowing in rage. "High Commander, we are experiencing total system failure." A panicked officer stammered. "Shields have dropped, targeting arrays are offline. Power levels are fluctuating across the fleet." It was impossible. The Zenvari had the most advanced warships in the known galaxy. Their technology was flawless, their systems impenetrable. And yet, at this moment, they were utterly powerless. Hades Prime remained untouched, its surface eerily silent. Then the first Zenvari ship exploded. Not from enemy fire, not from human resistance, but from within. The bridge of the dreadnought Kreshavar went dark before the ship erupted into a fireball, splitting in half as its own reactors overloaded. Across the fleet, chaos spread like wildfire. More ships began to fail. More systems went dead. And then, in the heart of the Zenvari fleet, a chilling realization dawned. They had walked into a trap. Panic spread through the Zenvari fleet like a plague. Officers scrambled, trying to bring their ships back under control. But the more they fought, the worse it became. The sleeper virus had fully activated. For decades, humanity had infiltrated the Zenvari's war networks, planting digital weapons in their systems, embedding silent code that waited unseen, undetected. The Zenvari had assumed humanity was weak. They hadn't realized that humans played the long game. On the bridge of the UNS Retribution, Commander Rourke stood with his arms crossed, watching the carnage unfold on his tactical display. A slow, satisfied smirk crept across his face. "Right on schedule," he murmured. The Zenvari never saw it coming. Their shields refused to engage. Their navigation systems spiraled into chaos. Their communications were cut off, leaving them isolated and vulnerable. The greatest war fleet in the galaxy had become a floating graveyard. And then humanity's true strength revealed itself. "Decloak the fleet," Rourke ordered. Across the system, human warships emerged from the void, their forms materializing from the blackness like specters. Massive battleships, sleek destroyers, and AI-guided drone swarms, all primed for destruction. "All ships, engage at will," Rourke commanded. What followed was not a battle, it was an execution. Panic spread through the Zenvari fleet like a plague, a silent, insidious sickness that struck with terrifying precision. Officers scrambled across their command decks, their voices rising in panic, calling for diagnostics, overrides, anything that could explain the unexplainable. The sleeper virus had fully activated. Emergency klaxons howled through the corridors of Zenvari warships as systems failed in rapid succession. Navigation charts flickered, replacing meticulously planned battle routes with meaningless static. Shields that had once been impervious barriers now lay dormant, their energy reserves drained before a single shot had been fired. Weapons locked. In place, their firing mechanisms unresponsive, lifeless. For decades, humanity had infiltrated the Zenvari war networks, planting digital time bombs within their infrastructure, embedding silent code that watched, learned, and waited for the perfect moment. The Zenvari had seen humanity as primitive, a species barely worthy of conquest. They hadn't realized that humans played the long game. On the bridge of the UNS Retribution, Commander Elias Rourke stood with his arms crossed, his gaze calm and calculating, watching the carnage unfold on his tactical display. Zenvari dreadnoughts, once the terror of the galaxy, floated helplessly in space, their crews trapped inside their own metal coffins. A slow, satisfied smirk crept across Rourke's face. "Right on schedule," he murmured. The Zenvari never saw it coming. Their fleet, once the most formidable force in the known universe, was now a graveyard before the battle even began. Hundreds of thousands of Zenvari warriors trapped in their ships, cut off from each other, unable to fight back. And then, humanity's true strength revealed itself. "Decloak the fleet," Rourke ordered. Across the system, human warships emerged from the void. What had once been empty space became a death trap, as Earth's hidden fleet materialized like phantoms, their hulls glowing in the distant starlight. There was no time for the Zenvari to react. Sleek destroyers and hulking dreadnoughts, AI-guided drone swarms poised to strike, all primed for the kill order. Rourke let the silence stretch for just a breath longer. Then, his voice steady as steel, "All ships engage at will." The void erupted into fire. What followed was not a battle, it was an execution. Zenvari Prime, the seat of the Dominion's power, had never known fear. From the towering heights of the Imperial Palace, the ruling caste had always watched conquests unfold with cold, clinical detachment. They had overseen the rise and fall of empires, their warlords shattering civilizations with brutal efficiency, their fleets unstoppable, their enemies powerless beneath the weight of their dominance. Until now. Across the homeworld, emergency sirens wailed, a sound that had never before been heard on Zenvari soil. The great planetary defenses that had once guarded the pride of the Dominion had turned against their own masters. Orbital stations exploded in eerie synchronization, detonations blooming like fireflowers in the night. It was not an attack. It was a purge from within. The sleeper virus had done its work. The planetary shields, once impenetrable, collapsed in shimmering waves, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. Tarkesh, the crown jewel of the Dominion, lay naked before the storm. For the first time in recorded history, Zenvari Prime was vulnerable. In the depths of the Dominion War Council, chaos erupted. The greatest military minds of the Zenvari, the architects of centuries of conquest, were now nothing more than frightened bureaucrats, scrambling in confusion and terror. "Impossible!" a Zenvari commander shrieked, his mandibles clicking erratically. How could they have done this? A senior warlord, his battle-worn carapace shuddering with rage, hissed through clenched fangs. They planned this war before it even began. The realization settled over them like a funeral shroud. Humanity had never been at their mercy. It had all been an illusion, a masterpiece of deception, years in the making. While the Zenvari boasted, humans waited. While the Zenvari crushed, others with brute strength, humans adapted, evolved, and plotted. And when the moment came, humanity struck with absolute unrelenting precision. From the massive war room holograph, the Council watched as human fleets descended like wraiths, pouring into Zenvari space unchallenged. A warlord trembled, eyes locked onto the unfolding massacre. "They are not weak," he whispered. "They never were." The Zenvari Dominion, the empire that had ruled the stars for centuries, was now on its knees. And humanity? Humanity was just getting started. With Zenvari Prime in ruins, the last echoes of battle still crackling across the void, the surviving remnants of the Empire had no choice. Their warships, once the terror of the galaxy, drifted powerless. Their planetary defenses lay in smoking wreckage. Their leaders, those who had not perished in the inferno of orbital bombardment, were now nothing more than fugitives, fleeing the destruction they had once commanded. And then, the message came. Single transmission, weak and fractured, sent out across all channels, a voice stripped of arrogance, of defiance, of pride. "We surrender." On the UNS Retribution, the bridge fell into stunned silence. The words repeated on a loop, as if the transmission itself couldn't believe it had been sent. Some officers erupted into cheers, clapping their hands on the backs of their comrades, grinning as the adrenaline of war gave way to victory. Others hesitated, their expressions grim. This wasn't supposed to happen. There was no plan for surrender. The Zenvari had never surrendered before. Dr. Evelyn Kale stepped forward, arms crossed, her voice low, deliberate. "We've won," she said softly. "This is the moment we decide what kind of victors we are." Across the bridge, Captain Vasquez, head of Earth's Black Ops Division, scoffed. "Spare them?" he growled, his voice laced with contempt. "You really think they'd do the same for us?" A deep silence settled over the command deck. Eyes turned toward Commander Rourke, the man who had led humanity to the brink of survival and beyond. Mercy, revenge, extinction. It was his call. His fingers hovered over the console. One command would wipe out the last of the Zenvari, and their species forever. Another would allow them to survive, broken, disgraced, living in the shadow of their own failure. This was the moment history would remember. The entire fate of the species hung in one decision, and humanity was watching. For centuries, the Zenvari Dominion had been the embodiment of fear, the oppressors, the conquerors, the destroyers. Their fleets had shattered empires, their armies had razed planets, and their warlords had dictated the ebb and flow of civilization itself. Now, they were nothing more than a dying beast, thrashing in the dark. Humanity had no intention of letting them recover. The UNS Retribution led the charge, spearheading a fleet of stealth warships that slipped into Zenvari-controlled space like shadows. They did not march in as invaders, nor did they come seeking battle. They came to dismantle. One by one, Zenvari supply chains disintegrated. Cargo transports filled with critical fuel reserves mysteriously exploded mid-flight, sabotaged by hidden kill switches planted years before the war had even begun. Hyper-relay stations, the lifelines of interstellar communication, were hijacked. Entire sectors were plunged into isolation, cut off from their own leaders. Weapons foundries, shipyards, and military installations, all were erased with surgical precision. Factories that had once churned out war machines for planetary subjugation were now little more than craters of smoldering wreckage. This was not an invasion. This was a culling. Rourke stood at the heart of the operation, eyes fixed on the tactical display, watching as the once invincible Zenvari war machine crumbled like dust in his hands. "High-value targets neutralized, sir," a tactical officer reported, voice tinged with disbelief. "Their fleets are crippled. They can't organize a counterattack." Rourke nodded, but his gaze remained cold. "Good. Keep pressing forward." On Zenvari Prime, the homeworld that had once stood as the beating heart of the Dominion, the panic was unimaginable. The mighty halls of the War Council, where generations of conquests had been plotted, stood abandoned. Warlords fled their posts, leaving their subordinates to scramble for meaningless control over a crumbling empire. Military officers issued desperate commands that no one heard. Entire sectors of their dominion fell into disarray, as once loyal generals turned on one another, grasping for power that no longer existed. Across the galaxy, something changed. For millennia, the Zenvari had been the nightmare lurking in the void. Now, they were the ones afraid. And for the first time, Rourke wondered if they should be. Within the UN Defense Council, the debate had reached a breaking point. The massive circular war chamber, usually a place of cold strategic calculation, was now filled with raised voices and barely restrained fury. The future of an entire species was at stake, and the weight of the decision pressed down on everyone. In the room, Dr. Evelyn Kale, usually measured and analytical, stood her ground, her voice calm but unwavering. "The war is over," she said, scanning the room. "The Zenvari are broken. Their empire is gone. If we continue, we are not liberators. We are conquerors." Her words hung in the air like a live wire. But across the table, Admiral Vasquez let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Spare them?" he snapped, leaning forward. His eyes, hardened by decades of warfare, were cold and unyielding. "Are you insane? They didn't show us mercy. They never do. If we give them a chance, they will rebuild, and next time we won't get lucky." A murmur rippled through the room. Some council members nodded in agreement. Others exchanged uneasy glances. For centuries, the Zenvari had dominated the galaxy with fear, reducing countless civilizations to ash and servitude. Humanity had survived by deception, by patience, by striking when the moment was right. Now, they stood on the precipice of absolute victory, but at what cost? The debate erupted into chaos. Kale slammed her hand on the table, her voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. "We are supposed to be better than them," she snapped. "Or are we going to prove them right? Are we just the next in line to rule through fear and genocide?" "That's exactly what we need to be," Vasquez shot back, his hands balled into fists. "If we don't finish this, we're inviting another war, one we might not win. What happens when another species looks at us the way we once looked at the Zenvari? You think they'll spare us?" The room fell into silence. At the head of the table, Rourke sat motionless, his fingers tensed against the console, his expression unreadable. The debate raged around him, but he heard none of it. We could stop now. We could end it. But will they ever stop fearing us? Outside the council chambers, human fleets still hovered over burning Zenvari worlds, weapons primed, waiting for his order. One command and the last remnants of the Zenvari would be erased forever. For millennia, humanity had been underestimated. It had been the prey. It had been the victim. But now they were the monsters in the dark, and Rourke had to decide if that was who they wanted to be. The alarms screamed across Earth's defense grid, a wailing dirge that signaled the unthinkable. The Zenvari fleet had arrived. Not an invasion. Force, not an armada meant to conquer, but something far worse. A fleet of the doomed coming for one final act of vengeance. Rourke's eyes snapped to the tactical display, his blood running cold. The remnants of Keshavar's warships had somehow bypassed the outer defenses, slipping past Earth's long-range detection systems like phantoms. Now they were here, closing in on the orbital stations with terrifying speed. Incoming enemy fire. The war room exploded into chaos. On-screen, Zenvari warships unleashed hell, their plasma cannons igniting the void with deadly precision. Human defense satellites shattered, debris cascading toward Earth's atmosphere in streaks of burning metal. They knew they were doomed, but they had not come to win. They had come to make humanity bleed. Inside the war room, the tension was suffocating. A vice grip around the throats of every officer and strategist. "Get those orbital cannons online," Vasquez barked, his voice sharp with urgency. "We're trying," a technician stammered, his hands flying over the controls. "Their ships are running suicide tactics, crashing directly into our command centers." Rourke's jaw clenched. This wasn't an invasion. It was vengeance. On the ground, civilians screamed as fire rained from the sky. Cities burned, military bases erupted, and spaceports were reduced to molten craters. They weren't targeting infrastructure. They weren't trying to cripple Earth's defenses. They were killing indiscriminately. Children, families, entire neighborhoods. It was a scorched earth policy, the final act of a species with nothing left to lose, and, in their final moments, the Zenvari had found humanity's greatest weakness, compassion. Unlike the Zenvari, humanity had always valued innocence, life, mercy. But mercy was a vulnerability, and Keshavar was exploiting it without hesitation. A deep rage coiled inside Rourke, dark and unrelenting. His fists tightened at his sides. They weren't just attacking Earth. They were trying to make humanity suffer. Vasquez turned to him, eyes burning with fury. "We wiped them out, every last one of them." Rourke said nothing. He had one last choice to make. The war could end now. The Zenvari were crippled, their fleet scattered, their homeworld burned to ruin. Their leaders were dead, their empire little more than a smoldering corpse in the void. But the attack on Earth had changed everything. Thousands were dead. Cities lay in ruins. The screams of civilians still echoed in the streets, their blood staining the rubble. Humanity had won, but the cost of victory was too high to celebrate. And now they faced a question they had never dared to ask before. Do we let them surrender, or do we finish what they started? The choice is obvious, Vasquez snapped, his voice sharp and unyielding. His gaze burned with fury, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. We annihilate them. End this species now before they rise again. Dr. Kale exhaled, shaking her head, her expression unreadable. Her voice was quieter but no less firm. If we do this, we become them. Is that what we fought for? The room fell into silence. All eyes turned to Rourke. He knew what the rational choice was. Vasquez was right. The Zenvari had been given a chance before. They had refused it. They had been offered mercy, and they had answered with genocide. If the situation were reversed, if humanity were the ones begging for survival, the Zenvari wouldn't hesitate. They would exterminate every last human without a second thought. Rourke knew this, accepted it, and yet, something deep inside him hesitated. It wasn't doubt. It wasn't weakness. It was something far more dangerous. "We were never meant to be conquerors," he said at last, his voice heavy with the weight of the moment. "But we were never meant to be prey either." The words hung in the air, stretching the silence into something almost unbearable. No one spoke. No one dared to. It was Rourke's choice, and humanity was watching. An officer's voice cut through the silence, breaking the moment. "Sir, Keshavar's forces are regrouping. If we don't act now, we'll lose the advantage." Rourke closed his eyes. He had known deep down that this moment would come. That in the end there was only one way this war could end. When he spoke, his voice was calm, unshaken. "Launch everything we have." He turned, locking eyes with his officers. No survivors. The final war had begun. The skies above Zenvari Prime burned. The once glorious capital of the Dominion was now nothing more than a dying world, its cities reduced to smoldering ruins, its great towers collapsing into dust. The last remnants of the Zenvari war machine had been hunted down, their warships vaporized one by one, until nothing remained but drifting wreckage and the echoes of their final stand. Above the planet, human fleets hovered like specters, their weapons still glowing from the firestorm they had unleashed. They had descended like avenging gods, relentless and unyielding, crushing what was left of a species that had once ruled the stars. And now, there was nothing left to rule. Inside the UN war room, the tension was thick as steel. The final transmission from the last Zenvari command ship crackled through the speakers, filling the chamber with the voice of a dying empire. It was not a plea for mercy. It was not an offer to surrender. It was only a single word, hissed through, venom and hatred burning itself into the memories of everyone who heard it. Monsters. The irony did not escape Rourke. He stood at the center of the war table, his expression impassive, his gaze locked onto the holographic display of Zenvari Prime. Below him, the planet burned, its surface engulfed in a funeral pyre of humanity's making. He had made the call. He had chosen survival over mercy, and now the Zenvari were no more. A voice broke through the silence, pulling him from his thoughts. "Commander." It was Dr. Kale. She stood at the edge of the room, her expression unreadable, her eyes scanning the ruins of a civilization that no longer existed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, "We did what we had to." A statement, not a question, but beneath her calm exterior there was something else. A flicker of something unspoken, something uneasy. But what happens now? Rourke exhaled slowly. "Now?" he murmured. He turned, his gaze drifting back toward the burning world before him, watching as the flames of victory swallowed what remained of the Zenvari legacy. Now the galaxy knows what happens when you underestimate humanity, but deep inside, beneath the hardened resolve, he knew the truth. The war was over. But the fear of humanity had only just begun. The sky burned. Columns of black smoke twisted into the heavens, scarlet fire reflecting off the ruins of Earth's greatest cities. The sirens wailed, but they came too late. The Zenvari suicide bombers had arrived. They had hidden within the wreckage of their own fleet, drifting lifelessly, no more than shattered hulls and debris. Humanity had lowered its guard, believing the battle was won. But the Zenvari weren't trying to win. They had only wanted to make Earth bleed. As soon as they breached the atmosphere, they split apart, scattering into hundreds of impact zones, targeting densely populated regions with terrifying precision. Then, the detonations began. New York, Beijing, Nairobi, Buenos Aires. One by one, the explosions carved gaping wounds into the heart of civilization. Skyscrapers crumbled, their steel, frames melting like wax. Bridges twisted and collapsed, their once strong foundations turned to dust. Highways shattered, throwing cars and bodies into the air like debris in a hurricane. Streets became firestorms. It wasn't war. It was pure vengeance. Inside the war room, Rourke's knuckles went white as he gripped the edge of the table, his breath shallow, uneven. The live feeds flickered across the holographic displays, each screen showing a new horror. The Zenvari had known they would lose, but they had wanted to make humanity suffer before the end. The war was over, but in their final moments, the Zenvari had ensured that Earth would never forget them. Rourke's throat felt dry as dust. "How many?" he forced out. A grim-faced officer swallowed hard, staring at the casualty reports flashing in front of him. "Confirmed 18 million casualties, sir. Estimated death toll rising." Silence. A silence so deep, so crushing, it felt as if the war room itself had become a tomb. No words could describe the suffocating weight of that number. The people they had fought to protect, the very reason this war had started, were dead. Vasquez stood rigid, his entire body trembling with contained fury. His hands, usually steady as steel, were clenched into fists. His voice, when it came, was low, almost a growl, shaking with rage. "We should have wiped them out the first chance we got." Rourke said nothing, because for the first time, he agreed. The ruins of Paris were still smoldering, a haze of ash and fire drifting through the shattered streets. The air was thick with smoke, the scent of burning stone and charred flesh clinging to the wind. Rourke and Vasquez stepped onto the battlefield, their boots crunching over the debris of a city that had once stood for art and beauty, now reduced to nothing but a graveyard. They had tracked the source of the suicide bombers, following the fragmented transmission signals back to one final stronghold, Keshavar's last hideout, buried beneath the collapsed remains of the Louvre. The Zenvari had turned it into a fortress of desperation, barricading themselves in the ruins, waiting for their final glorious last stand. Rourke wasn't in the mood for mercy. He led the best of the best. Human special forces, cybernetic soldiers, battle-hardened warriors, each one carrying the rage of a grieving planet in their weapons. They moved through the war-torn streets, stepping over the bodies of the fallen, their footsteps silent, their intentions clear. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution, and the Zenvari knew it. The fighting was brutal. Zenvari warriors, knowing they had no future, fought with the ferocity of the doomed. They didn't care about survival, only about dragging as many humans as possible down with them. They fought with blades, with plasma fire, with their own teeth, lunging at soldiers with animalistic rage. Rourke didn't flinch. His rifle spat, death cutting down anything in his path. His blade tore through armor, spilling Zenvari blood onto the rubble. His fists broke bone, snapping mandibles, crushing windpipes. And then, he saw him. Keshvar, the last warlord of the Zenvari, the one who had sent the suicide bombers, the one who had turned Earth's greatest cities into funeral pyres. He stood in the center of the wreckage, his armor cracked, his weapons failing, but his eyes still burned with defiance. Blood dripped from his mandibles, thick and black, but he grinned. "You think you've won?" Keshvar hissed, his voice wet with blood and hatred. He coughed, dark ichor spilling onto the dust. "You think this is over?" Rourke raised his gun. "No, but you are." The shot rang out. Keshvar's body hit the rubble, lifeless, but his grin never faded. Even in death he was laughing. High above, the last remnants of the Zenvari fleet had gathered. Their ships, scarred, fractured, barely holding together, formed a silent, motionless armada against the backdrop of the burning stars. They had no home to return to, no empire left to serve, no future to claim, and so they made their final choice. The bridge of the UNS Retribution was deathly quiet, the tension palpable as the war-torn Zenvari fleet loomed on the tactical display. Then, a voice broke through the silence, raw with disbelief. "Commander," a tactical officer called out, eyes wide with shock. "The Zenvari ships, they're overloading their reactors." Rourke's breath hitched. He turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "They're what?" Before anyone could react, the first Zenvari warship erupted into blinding light, its core collapsing inward before it burst apart, sending molten wreckage spiraling into the void. Then, another and another. Across the battlefield, one by one, the last of the Zenvari fleet began to explode. They weren't being fired upon. There were no human weapons targeting them. They were doing this to themselves. The Zenvari captains, faced with defeat unlike anything their people had ever known, had chosen annihilation over surrender. They would not let humanity be the ones to end them. They would burn themselves out first. Rourke watched in silence, the screens around him flashing red as ship after ship erased itself from existence, each death a final, defiant act against the victors. "No survivors," Vasquez murmured, arms crossed. His voice was hard, unreadable. "They refused to let us have the satisfaction." Rourke exhaled, but there was no satisfaction to be found. He felt no joy watching them die. The Zenvari were gone, their empire erased. And yet, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like something else entirely. The fires of Zenvari Prime could be seen from orbit, a dying ember in the vast, uncaring void. Once this planet had been the seat of an empire, a world of towering spires and war-forged glory. Now it was nothing but ruin, a world reduced to ash. Rourke stood alone in his quarters, staring out at the burning surface below. He had watched countless battles, seen planets fall, but this was different. This was final. A knock at the door. He didn't turn. He knew who it was. Dr. Kale entered, her steps soft, hesitant. For a long moment, she said nothing. She only watched him, her gaze heavy as if she were trying to find the right words. Then softly, almost a whisper, "We didn't win. We just survived." Rourke let out a slow breath, his hands resting against the metal railing, fingers tightening as he took in the sight of the burning planet below. And now the galaxy will never trust us again. Kale's expression remained unreadable, her arms crossed as she leaned against the doorway. Should they? The words cut deeper than they should have. His jaw tensed, his hands curling into fists. We were forced into this war, he said, his voice low, steady, but laced with something unspoken. We were nearly wiped out. We had to do what we did. Kale didn't argue. She only nodded, her eyes dark with understanding. Then softly she said, the words that hit harder than any bullet. And the Zenvari told themselves the same thing when they attacked us. Rourke's breath stilled. The truth settled like a weight on his chest, heavy, suffocating, because he knew, deep down he knew. This had stopped being about survival long ago. This was something else. And humanity had crossed a line they could never return from. The galaxy watched in silence. For eons, the Zenvari Dominion had stood unchallenged, their power absolute, their will unquestioned. They had dominated the stars, their war fleets carving a path of destruction through civilizations who dared defy them. They had been the rulers, the predators, the architects of countless empires' destruction. And now, they were gone. And in their ashes humanity stood. Across the stars, alien species that had once lived in fear of the Zenvari now turned their attention to Earth. Some, seeing what had happened, bent the knee before a demand was even made. They surrendered not because of war, but because of the quiet, suffocating realization that humanity was worse than the Zenvari had ever been. But not all of them bowed, not all of them would forget. In the shadows of the stars, councils gathered in secret, leaders speaking in hushed voices. Ancient powers that had once stood neutral, content to watch, now found themselves forced to make a choice. There were those who trembled at what had happened, who whispered that Earth was to be feared, that this new power had come from the depths of desperation and would not stop at the Zenvari. But there were also those who saw an opportunity. If humanity could bring down an empire as mighty as the Zenvari, they were either a threat to be eliminated, or a power to be controlled. And so in the blackness of uncharted space, fleets were constructed in secret, alliances forged in the darkness, and plans set into motion. Because the greatest threat to the galaxy was no longer the Zenvari. It was humanity. And then, far beyond the known systems deep in the void, a signal was received. A transmission, not from any known species, not from any of the factions already watching humanity with fear and uncertainty. This was something else, a voice, speaking in a language no human had ever heard before. The Zenvari were cruel, but they were only pawns. Now, you have drawn our attention, humans. Let's see if you are as strong as you think. The screen flickered and then went black. On the bridge of the UNS Retribution, Rourke stared into the abyss of deep space, his face unreadable, his mind turning over what had just happened. His war had ended, but a new one was just beginning. The Zenvari Dominion was no more. The once feared warships of the Dominion, which had patrolled the galaxy for centuries, were now scrap metal drifting through the void. Their great manufacturing planets, once responsible for forging the tools of war and conquest, now served a new master. Instead of weapons for the Zenvari war machine, they now produced warships for the United Earth Fleet. Where the Zenvari banners once flew, now stood human insignias, and at the heart of it all, Commander Elias Rourke sat, not as a soldier, not as a warrior, but as the reluctant ruler of an empire he never wanted. The War Councils divide. From his seat in the UN War Council, he listened, as political leaders, military strategists, and economists argued over the future of humanity's newfound dominance. We must consolidate our power, one general insisted, his voice firm. We now control the largest military force in the galaxy. We cannot allow another empire to rise against us. A military occupation is unsustainable, Dr. Evelyn Kale countered. We fought to survive, not to replace the Zenvari. If we keep expanding, we become them. The tension in the room was suffocating. Some saw the fall of the Zenvari as an opportunity, a chance to secure humanity's place at the top before another. Power dared to challenge them. Others, like Kale, feared the path they were on. Rourke remained silent, his gaze fixed on the holographic map of the galaxy, where entire sectors, once ruled by the Zenvari, were now painted in Earth's colors. The burden of power, it was supposed, to be over. They had fought for survival, for the right to exist. And yet here they were, not just surviving, but ruling. Power does not simply disappear. It only changes hands. Rourke leaned forward, studying the galaxy laid out before him, its borders reshaped by war, by fire, by choices that could never be undone. And now that power is ours, he murmured, almost to himself. The room fell silent. The war had been about defense, about humanity's survival. But now, they held the keys to an empire that could shape the course of the galaxy for generations to come. Would they be its protectors, or its new tyrants? Rourke did not know the answer. The corridors of the UNS Retribution were quiet now, too quiet. For the first time in months, there were no alarms blaring, no tactical reports flooding the screens, no desperate calls for reinforcements. The war was over, the Zenvari were gone, but the weight of it all remained, heavy and unshakable. Rourke stood alone, staring out through the vast observation window, watching as fire and debris drifted through the blackness of space. The last remnants of a civilization that no longer existed. The price of victory was written in the ashes. You're not celebrating. Rourke didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew that voice. Dr. Kale. Should I be? He asked, his voice hollow, stripped of its usual steel. She stepped beside him, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the same burning world. We won, she said softly. Rourke let out a slow, bitter breath. Did we? Kale sighed, her expression unreadable. We survived. That's all that matters. Survival. That was the justification. That was the mantra that had driven them forward, through blood, through fire, through the destruction of an entire species. Rourke rubbed his face, exhaustion creeping into his voice. You know, when I was a kid, I used to wonder what it would feel like to stand at the top, to be the strongest, to be the ones calling the shots. Kale turned slightly, watching him. And now? He met her gaze, tired, hollow, but honest. Now I don't feel like we won a war, he admitted. I feel like we just took someone else's place. Kale didn't argue, because deep down she feared the same thing. Rourke's gaze drifted back to the dying planet, to the crumbling bones of the Zenvari homeworld, to the last traces of an empire that had once ruled the stars. We burned them out, he murmured. Every last one of them. No Zenvari left. Not even the ones who tried to surrender. Kyle hesitated. They wouldn't have shown us mercy. Rourke nodded. No, he agreed. They wouldn't have. But he closed his eyes as if that acknowledgement could lessen the weight pressing on his chest. But that doesn't make this feel any less like a graveyard. The silence between them stretched, cold and unforgiving. Then finally Kale spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't win. We just became something else. Rourke said nothing, because he knew. She was right. The message arrived without warning. There had been no detected ships, no encrypted pings, no prior activity in the deep space networks. One moment, the long-range comms array orbiting the ruins of Zenvari Prime was silent. The next, it wasn't. A strange, impossible transmission appeared on the main communication channels, bypassing firewalls and security protocols with unnerving ease. It wasn't a distress signal. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a warning. A voice, calm and ancient, spoke in a language no human had ever heard before, and yet they understood every word. The Zenvari were cruel, but they were never the masters. They were only pawns. A chill crept down Rourke's spine. The Zenvari, lords of war, the empire that had conquered and crushed civilizations for millennia, had served something else? You have burned an empire, but in doing so, you have awakened something worse. The bridge of the UNS Retribution was silent, every officer frozen in place, eyes fixed on the glowing red transmission flickering across the screen. They are watching now. The words were delivered without emotion. No threat, no demands, just a fact. And then, nothing. The message ended abruptly, leaving behind no coordinates, no identifiers, no trace of its origin, just a void of silence. Rourke stood on the bridge staring at the blank screen, his gut twisting. For the first time in his life he felt fear, not for himself, but for what came next. The war was over, but something far worse had just begun. The war was over, and yet the silence that followed was deafening. Across the galaxy, alien species watched in stunned horror. The Zenvari Dominion, once the most feared empire in the known universe, had been wiped out in a matter of days, and humanity was still standing. The UN Defense Council issued an official broadcast declaring the fall of the Zenvari Dominion. Their words were measured, diplomatic. They spoke of defensive action, of necessary survival. But no one believed that. Not the old trade alliances that had once bowed to the Zenvari. Not the minor powers that had cowered beneath their rule. Now, they all feared Earth. Meanwhile, distress signals trickled in from former Zenvari territories. At first, nothing but fragmented radio chatter. Then, an intercepted transmission from a dying warlord. You think you've won, humans? You were never meant to see what comes next. The meaning was unclear, but the unease was not. Something else was waiting. Tarkesh, the Zenvari homeworld, had been reduced to ruins. Fires still burned across the shattered capital. Skyscrapers lay twisted and broken. The once mighty streets of an empire now nothing but graves. A human recon team moved through the rubble, searching for survivors, technology, anything worth salvaging. And then they found it. A massive, subterranean vault, hidden beneath the wreckage of the Imperial Palace. Not Zenvari-made. Older. The soldiers hesitated. Even the Zenvari had feared this place. And yet, curiosity pulled them forward. Inside, they found glyphs and markings that no database recognized. The symbols hummed with an ancient alien energy. Lone scientist approached an inactive terminal, fingers hovering over its surface. This technology is millions of years old, he whispered. Then the power flickered on, and a signal erupted into deep space. Not a distress call, a summoning beacon. The realization hit too late. Someone, or something, was meant to awaken. The deep space monitoring arrays blinked to life. Every major human-controlled system detected it at the same time. Something was coming. Not ships, not armies. Something bigger. Across all known frequencies, a message broadcast itself. Not a threat, not a warning, an invitation. A voice ancient and calm spoke. The Zenvari were cruel, but they were only pawns. Now you've drawn our attention, humans. Let's see if you're as strong as you think. And then, silence. A silence that felt worse than war. Rourke stood on the bridge, staring into the void of deep space. The tactical displays flickered. Unidentified readings appeared on long-range scanners. The UN Defense Council erupted into chaos. The reports were clear. Something vast was moving beyond known space. A final glance at the burning remnants of Zenvari dominance. Humanity had proven its strength. But at what cost? A single ping echoed through the ship's sensors. The first unknown vessel had entered range. Rourke took a deep breath. All ships, full combat alert. We're not done yet. And just like that, the real war began.